affect every citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, hosted by Ozzi Warwick every Monday from 1:30 p.m. Take a stand for TNT on the most influential name in radio, I-95.5 FM.
And good afternoon, Trinidad and Tobago. Good afternoon, K.
Good afternoon,
I got the
yes.
correction, right? K. All right. And good afternoon to the listening audience out there abroad who taking the program via the internet, as well as I'd like to welcome our viewers on the live stream, which is taking place on the OWTU Education Research Facebook page. This afternoon, I would like to address the issue of sharing the burden of adjustment. I think I want to spend a little time focusing on that. But also, I'm actually going to try to see if in the last 5 minutes to take some calls. But I would want the callers to be focused and to be clear in terms of the question that I will pose to the end, coming down to the end. But really, it is about, I want us to explore a little bit this afternoon this question of sharing the burden of adjustment. Because I think coming out of the meeting with the Prime Minister on Wednesday, by the way, after the program on Monday, I do not know if it is that he heard the program, but he did immediately call the trade unions to get a meeting. So that meeting was held on Wednesday. But, and I think most of Trinidad and Tobago would have seen that the trade unions came out of that dissatisfied. And I think one of the key things has to do with the inability to properly understand this concept of sharing the burden of adjustment. So today I would like to discuss in some detail the question of sharing that burden of adjustment. In so doing, let me lay some foundation, right? In 2008, there was the global economic crisis, which really was a crisis of capitalism. This crisis led to the Eurozone economic crisis. Now, in Trinidad and Tobago, being part of the global economy, we too was significantly hit with the collapse of CL Financial and to a lesser extent HCU, but CL Financial. And it is very important to note, Trinidad and Tobago, that the crisis was driven by the private sector. I think I need to say that because it's so fascinating how people skew the debate, ignoring one sector to literally attack another. Because it was the private sector that drove the crisis. Now, the only reason most citizens in Trinidad and Tobago did not feel the full brunt of the crisis was because taxpayers bailed out CL Financial. Like in the US, remember, in the US they had this idea, too big to fail. Those were the huge manufacturing companies, and therefore the US had to bail out those companies. It was the same in Trinidad and Tobago. CL Financial was too big to fail. Can you imagine if it had failed? People's pension funds, insurance, people's savings. I mean, it would have been catastrophic. But it was taxpayers. So it was public money that was used to bail out a private enterprise. Now, you may wonder, why am I saying it so strongly? It's because people have this idea that privatization is the only way to go. But placing key goods and services in private hands does not mean automatically that you would have, indeed, your economy would grow. The question was, therefore, how to respond to the crisis, the economic crisis globally. In the case of Obama, he chose a growth path instead of austerity. So here's the joke. It actually worked and has had long-term recovery with job creation. Now, if you recall, during those days, the early days of Obama's administration, 2008 to 2009, 2009 to 2010, every month they were monitoring, guess what? Job creation, you know. So the idea was that in order to come out of the crisis, significant public investment was necessary to stimulate the economy, to grow the economy, and create jobs, because they recognize that once you create sustainable jobs, you would have a very vibrant economy because people are spending. The focus of the Obama administration was not job cuts, retrenchment. It was public investment to grow the economy, to create jobs, and it worked. Now, however, in Europe, you had a very interesting dynamic where you had surplus countries. Those were countries whose economy was running in surplus, like Germany, France, UK. And then you had the deficit countries, countries whose economy was running in a deficit, huge amount of deficit and debt, such as Greece, Italy, Portugal. And then what happened is that the surplus countries sought to impose austerity on the deficit countries. In other words, we will not help you unless you engage in austerity. And you know what happened? It prolonged the crisis. Not to mention the social upheaval of massive job losses, cuts in things like pension, etc. Many ordinary people's lives, Trinidad and Tobago, many ordinary people's lives were shattered using that approach. Now, Portugal, interestingly enough, Portugal, which was a deficit country, broke away from the pact because they elected a socialist government who said, no to austerity. We are, in fact, going to do the opposite. We are going to engage in public investment, save jobs. We are going to ensure that we can get the economy going. And guess what? The Portugal, under that approach, has been able to cut its debt burden as well as to grow their economy by some 1.3%. So that worked. So what is the lesson learned? Is that public investment trumps, no pun intended, austerity in terms of coming out of the crisis. So back to Trinidad and Tobago. 2014, 2015, because notwithstanding the economic crisis, oil prices were still high. Okay. Then comes 2014, 2015, where we saw a vast reduction in revenue. So the question is, which path would we take in this instance? Do we take a path of austerity where we cut? Or do we take a path of growth where we can sort of, the US model, if you may, for want of a better expression, to grow the economy? And then the second question is that who will share the burden of adjustment? Now, just to clarify definitions, because sometimes it's always good to clarify definitions. Sharing the burden of adjustment means that we recognize that we're in some difficulty and troubling times, and therefore some adjustments will have to be made. The question is, who will bear that burden of that adjustment? Who alone would carry that adjustment? Or, as the progressive movement is advocating, let us equitably share it. Okay. Now, the labor movement has two answers to these two questions. So let me just remind Trinidad and Tobago what were the questions. Which path do we take? Austerity or growth? And who will share the burden of adjustment? In the first instant, with regards to austerity or growth, we chose the growth path over austerity and therefore submitted, guess what? Labor's economic alternative plan, which was a transformational stimulus package to grow the economy as revenue fell. The second, which is the second question about sharing the burden of adjustment, is that there must be equitable sharing of the burden of adjustment. Now, at the moment, let us be honest and let us be frank. At the moment, it is only ordinary people carrying the burden with retrenchments, taxes, cuts in social programs, and guess what? The new big thing, wage freeze. And I saw in the newspapers, economists, government must act on public sector spending, wage freeze. Three economists talking about wage freeze as an option. Do you know what I did not see here? Price freeze as an option. And this is the fascinating thing about moments like these in any society. How is it automatic? And it's like automatic. It's like almost instinctive that, oh my goodness, we're in trouble. Guess what? Poor people, working people, all they have to carry out to this, Automatic, So wage freeze as an option, and I put in it, I know it's kind of inverse. Wage freeze as an option, but not price freeze as an option. And the three economists goes on to talk about workers and the salaries, and workers and the salaries. Okay, so I'm thinking, and businesses and prices, inflation, profits. Why are we not having that conversation? Why are we not asking, what role can businesses play in growing the economy, or what will be their burden of sacrifice? And this is the point, and I think we do not want that point to be lost. Now, what does the data say? I want to share some data coming out of CSO. 60% of our labor force earns less than $4,000 a month. So you asking, let me see if I get this straight. So we now, in this difficult period, are going to ask that 60% of that labor force who earns less than $4,000 a month to carry this burden, to make what sacrifice you want those people to make when they earning less than $4,000 a month. What sacrifice are you asking them to make that are wage free? So you stuck at $4,000 a month, or worse, being sent home. And in many of the instances is a single salary supporting the household. It's either a single mom or a single dad supporting the household. Right? That's what we're asking. Now, you know what is also interesting about the CSO data? And it's really incredible that these three economists didn't mention this what I'm about to share with you. And that's why when I come on this program, I like to talk about class interest, I like to talk about class interest. Because you see, they represent a class interest. And even though they call themselves economists, the fact of the matter is they are bourgeois economists. And they can see nothing else but workers being nothing more than a number, a tool, a beast of burden. Because here's what they did not tell you, these highly acclaimed economists. That the wages and salaries as a percentage of GDP, has been declining from 5.9% in 2005 to just over 4% in 2015. So this is your pie. This is your GDP, right? You have your pie. So the percentage, or that part of the pie, which are for workers, have been getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So the question we have to ask, so who getting more and more and more if the workers getting less and less and less? And then now you're saying, well, here's what the pie has gotten even smaller. The pie now has gotten smaller. So here what you see, that little percentage that you were getting less and less, we had to take that from you now. Incredible, isn't it? And that is what that's not the conversation we have in. That in fact wages and salaries over the last 10 years have been declining as a percentage of GDP. Now remember, I don't want people to misunderstand. People have a way of running away. I am not here, and at no point did you hear me at this point since we started at about 2:35 to now. I am not clamoring for wage increases. I am saying that we need to have a conversation about how we share the burden of adjustment. I don't want people to take the conversation in a different course. And if you're not having the conversation to how we share then you cannot ask me. You cannot ask me to be the only person to carry the burden of adjustment. Correct? Now, the labor sector, therefore, as the labor force in this country, the drivers of our economy, finds itself in a relatively weak position because workers are being negatively impacted through what you call the distribution effects of the current economic environment. In other words, inflation or prices continue to go and go and go and go and go up. All right? And then the workers now are being told, okay, you have to sacrifice. The labor sector, you must sacrifice and carry the burden of adjustment. Hear the contradiction. Whilst prices continue to rise and profits continue to soar. That is a recipe, and I will state this here now, for social upheaval. Because you cannot ask me, and me alone, to carry that cross. So, wage freeze an option, and nothing about price freeze as an option. What if the business community come to us and say, all right, here what? Working people, this is a hard, difficult time. We know it's hard for everybody. So here's what. We are actually going to not raise prices for the next 18 months. Nothing will go up. Everything will remain exactly the same. You hear in that conversation. You know what they say? Well, workers, times are difficult, so I have to send you home. Times are difficult, so here what? instead of working, coming to work because they don't want to, it's illegal for them to unilaterally cut somebody's wages, right? But here's what. We will have, instead of working for 8 hours, you have to work for 6 hours. So it's in effect a cut. All right? Or we might even go so far as crazy enough like in the 80s. 10% cut across the board. Remember that? Take away COLA, cost of living allowance, the one little thing to help you buffer a little bit in terms of inflation. In other words, only ordinary working people, the vulnerable, must be the ones to carry. Why is the discussion targeted towards only workers and their representatives and not targeted towards the business communities who continues to declare huge amounts of profits? Okay? And what really is the government doing in terms of managing the question of inflation and rising food prices and so on? So let us just go back to the Labour's economic alternative plan. Because I didn't come here this afternoon to talk about sharing the burden of adjustment and just say problem. We have an idea or an approach to come out of the crisis through growing the economy. Now, LEAP, which is Labour's Economic Alternative Plan, was presented to the government, in case anybody should ask. And it basically is a two-pronged strategy, which I want to share in a little more details for Trinidad and Tobago to understand. And then we'll take some calls. Yeah. Two-pronged approach. Halt the long-term slide and kickstart the economy. Here why. We noticed that over the last 10 years that the economy itself have not been growing. In fact, it has been shrinking. So the growth rate over a period of 10 years have been going down and down and down and down. But you see why we don't pick it up or we don't pay attention to it is because of oil prices. Oil prices go up, so we start to spend. Not noticing that even if you get a spike in a year or two, over a long-term period, you'll realize, so you spike here, but then they go down here, and then they spike here, and then they go down here, and then they spike, go down, until eventually you realize the economy is going to come to a halt. Now, in terms of declining growth, coupled with cutting jobs, cutting spending power, and so on, continuing to import, food import bill, $6 billion. In other words, sending away our foreign exchange, we will crash the economy in a significant way. So we said, halt the long-term slide and kickstart the economy and then sustain the growth. You halting the long-term slide by three objectives: support new business activity, boost consumer spending on local production, and boost exports to earn foreign currency. That is the labor movement talking. You hear those objectives? Support new business activity, boost consumer spending. Of course, you can't boost consumer spending if you're sending home everybody. On local production, so we keep the foreign exchange here. And then boost exports to earn foreign exchange. Let's take some calls. What's the number for persons to call in?
622-3937.
622-3937. Okay. So we have calls already? Have calls. All right. So the question is, let's be focused. Do you think that only workers and ordinary people must bear the burden of adjustment in this period? That's the question. Right. Go ahead.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon.
Yeah, Mr. sharing the burden, right?
Yes.
Yeah. But you know, if you ask in the business sector to freeze all your prices for a while, you know what the reaction you would get to the kind of business sector we have in this country today?
Mm-hmm.
The only option the government has is to increase the taxes, let them pay more tax. But if the government do that now,
Mm-hmm.
they would say the government that encourages business.
Yes.
They would have to send home people on the case maybe. So you're between a rock and a hard place in really
Mm-hmm.
the burden here.
Yes. But I like where you were going down the road of taxing the business community, because they owe taxes. We're not having that conversation about the billions of dollars that the business community continue to owe this country in taxes. They're not paying their fair share of taxes. We have another caller?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Sharing the burden of adjustment. Only workers and ordinary people? That's correct.
What I was going to add, the question I got was that one just thinking about is talking about the economy.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You have to get your priorities right.
Mm-hmm.
Because now I'm going to outstanding negotiations and
Mhm.
what I call other business to take people retired and so on.
Mhm.
And you use money on everything time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
spending money on warehouse and everything. The priority has to be the question is always that human development first.
Yes, that's correct. Human development, because at the end of the day, it is us, the ordinary workers. You know, we need to do more. These highly acclaimed economists, these bourgeois economists, they need to look at some more qualitative and quantitative data to tell us exactly what has been, by taxes, what has been the contribution of ordinary people in terms of this country. Yes, hello? Good afternoon.
Hello?
Yes, good afternoon.
So that's the last thing. Why can't somebody like us like come in this class? When you have ordinary person call for something economically gifted and so in his class.
Why not? If
So that's now. I'm talking about what the business people will do. I have a business, right?
uh-huh.
What if the thing I pay my workers is normal.
Right.
People think that we will camp with a little visit pay, right? So we can much more efficiently.
Well,
And more, I go ahead.
no, what I want you to do, and I want you to listen carefully a little bit. One of the proposals we have is something called an industrial fund to help, because I'm assuming you're a medium or small business. I want you to listen carefully. We want to be able to use the equity or the liquidity from banks, the credit unions, to provide a fund. It's called an industrial development fund, so that small and medium businesses can access the fund to get greater investment to improve your plant, your equipment, etc. That is in the proposal. In other words, when we talk about sharing the burden of adjustment, and when we talk about our economic alternative plan, our economic alternative plan speaks to enhancing local and medium businesses. So you follow me? And that is what it is about. In other words, I want you and me to talk and partner in order for your business to grow, because let's be frank, if your business grows, and especially if you're dealing with local production, you help the economy. So our economic alternative plan through the industrial fund will say to you, listen, you can access this fund. And I'm not talking about NIDCO and all of that thing. I'm talking about substantial amount of capital investment in your business to grow your business. So that is what it's about. That is correct, sir.
Right, so what about now you're
I know.
I talk about the business people who deal with foreign things.
Uh-huh.
A lot of the small business people still deal with foreign.
Yeah, I understand that, but we as an economy, as a country, do need to encourage. You see, that's how you encourage, provide incentives, which is what Obama and they did in order to come out of their crisis. They provided a lot of incentives for the businesses, but for local businesses, so that the local business can generate foreign exchange.
Attitude of business because the local people we tend to raise the price and tell them you can get what
Yeah.
somebody else will buy.
Sure.
That's supposed to be the attitude of the people in the country. For that to
Well,
understand where coming from.
go-
The attitude, the pictures of the people have to change. So
I agree.
this is my people I deal with, and we don't want to go too much. Instead of charging $50, I will charge them the $25.
Correct.
So make 150%.
Yeah, and I think we're on the same page, my brother. We're on the same page. All right. I think the 2 o'clock news is here, but I really like that last discussion. I hope the listener is still there. I really enjoyed that little discourse. And you know, that's what it is, Kerr. It is having the conversations in a real objective way. We are not against business. We are just saying that we cannot have these huge businesses consume small and medium businesses and take our foreign exchange through massive imports. That's what we're saying. Simple. So, I'll come to an end of this segment of the Taking a Stand for Trinidad and Tobago. And what I would like to say as I end here is that taking a stand for Trinidad and Tobago also means taking a stand against the idea that only workers and ordinary people must carry the burden of adjustment. Thank you. Have a good week, and join me again. I was your host, Ozzi Warwick, on Take a Stand for Trinidad and Tobago. Join me again next week, Monday, same time, same place here on I-95. Thank you.
Take a stand